Rita told me to throw the old man out. This place doesn't serve trash, she said loud enough for the entire diner to hear, and everyone went quiet as if cruelty was normal, as if it belonged on the breakfast menu right between pancakes and black coffee. It was just after sunrise, the Lake Michigan wind cutting through the cracks of the windows fog curling over the glass like breath from a tired giant. Customers huddled in their booths, coats still on hands wrapped around mugs for warmth. I had just refilled a family's hot chocolate when the door swung open and a blast of icy air swept through the diner. The old man stepped in trembling like the wind had carried him instead of his legs. His coat was torn at the shoulder, stuffing poking out like winter trying to escape. His gloves didn't match his beard was soaked with half-melted snow, and his shoes left a trail of water behind him as if he were dissolving right into the floor. The moment people saw him, you could feel the room shift. A woman in a red scarf clutched her purse. A businessman yanked his laptop off the table as if the old man might breathe on it, and a teenager by the window murmured, "Great." Another one without bothering to lower his voice. Behind the counter, corporate's favorite sign stared down at all of us. No loitering, no panhandling, no exceptions. The old man hesitated, eyes darting around the room as if searching for permission to exist. He brushed at his coat, but the fabric was too soaked to respond, and then he stepped toward the counter, each shuffle more apologetic than the last. I was wondering, he said softly if I could get a hot chocolate. Just something warm. I think I lost my wallet in the snow. Rita didn't even look up from her tablet. "No money, no service," she snapped. "You can't stay here." Her voice cut through the diner like a dropped knife. The old man flinched, his face, flushing eyes shining with humiliation. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," he whispered. "I just need a moment to warm up. I'll leave after." His voice cracked, and the sound of it made something deep inside me twist. A few customers laughed quietly. One of the teenagers pulled out his phone and began recording, whispering to his friend, "This is going straight to TikTok." The old man stumbled backward a step, reaching for the counter to steady himself. His lips were edging toward blue. Rita slammed her tablet down. "If corporate sees a homeless man inside, we're done," I said out. "Now!" The word echoed in the room out. No one stood up for him. Not the couple who bragged every Sunday about helping at church. Not the businessmen who tipped extra only when they were feeling important. Not the teenagers who found entertainment in filming someone else's humiliation. Everyone pretended to be busy while watching the scene unfold like it was some low-budget drama meant for their morning pastime. And suddenly, I was back in a grocery store aisle years ago, watching my mother count coins too slowly while a clerk called her a beggar and told her to stop holding up the line. I remembered the way she apologized even though she hadn't done anything wrong, the way people watched but didn't step in, and the way I promised myself I would never stand by and let that happen to someone else again. The old man shivered harder. That was it. I set down the tray in my hands and stepped forward. Conversations halted as eyes turned toward me. "Sir," I said gently, "you can sit. I've got you." Rita spun around like I had slapped her. "Mara! Don't you dare!" But I already had my wallet out. I had $34 until payday. 12 of it was supposed to cover groceries. I still pulled out a 5. "One hot chocolate," I said, handing it to her. "On me." Rita stared at the bill like it was contaminated. "You're breaking policy. He's not trash," I said, my voice hardening, but the way people are treating him is. The diner went still. Forks froze mid-air. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the vents seemed to fall silent for a beat. The old man looked at me with an expression so fragile it made my chest tighten, a mix of gratitude and disbelief softening the lines of his tired face. Rita's jaw clenched. "My office. Now." She grabbed the $5 like it offended her and marched toward the back hallway. I knew exactly what was coming. A lecture. A write-up. Maybe worse. Jobs like mine didn't survive acts of defiance. As I walked toward the hallway, I heard the teenager with the phone whisper, "This is going to blow up online." I didn't care, because the old man was sitting now cupping the hot chocolate between his shaking hands, steam curling around him like a small, quiet mercy. And I knew one thing: if you look away when someone is being made small, you become part of the reason they stay small. I paused at the end of the hallway, turning back to look at him one more time. If I had known who he really was, if I had known how much would unravel because of those 7 minutes of kindness, if I had known my entire life was about to crack open like lake ice in spring, I might have hesitated, but thank God I didn't. Rita shut the office door behind us so hard the frame rattled. The sound made me flinch, but she didn't bother hiding the satisfaction on her face. She pointed at the metal chair across from her desk like I was a child being sent to the principal. I sat down slowly, my pulse still shaking from what had happened out front. She didn't waste time. "What you did out there could get us sued," she said, pacing behind her desk. "If that man slips, if he causes a scene, if he harasses customers, corporate will shut us down and they will not hesitate." Do you understand that I opened my mouth, but she kept going? You think you're some kind of hero? You think giving him $5 makes you better than the rest of us? This isn't a shelter, Mara. This is a business. I swallowed hard. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was trespassing, she snapped. He came in here without money. That's a liability. And you made it worse by escalating the situation. I felt heat rise in my face. I didn't escalate anything. I just didn't let him be humiliated. Rita stopped pacing and leaned forward, palms on her desk. Your job is to serve customers, not lecture them, and not break company policy because you felt emotional. She pulled a yellow slip from a drawer and slapped it on the table. A write-up. I stared at it. My chest tightened. Too many of those and they'd replace me with a college kid who could smile on demand. Sign it, she ordered. My hands trembled as I picked up the pen. I wasn't crying, not yet, but the pressure behind my eyes was building like a storm. When I finished, she snatched the paper, tossed it in a folder, and pointed at the door. Get back to work, and don't pull a stunt like that again. The hallway felt longer than usual as I stepped back toward the diner floor. The voices hit me before I even reached the end. Whispering, snickering, stares that skimmed across me like cold water. The teenager who had filmed the scene earlier now had his phone up again. There she is, he whispered loudly. Miss Save the World. His friend laughed. A woman in a suit shook her head and muttered, Some people just want attention. A man near the window said, She probably thinks the old guy will tip her with imaginary money. I kept walking. My throat tightened so much I could barely breathe. When I reached the kitchen door, Mariah, the hostess, leaned against the counter with her arms folded. You really messed up, she said. Rita is furious. She said corporate will hear about this. I forced a smile, weak and shaking. I just didn't want him to freeze. Yeah, she said, rolling her eyes. But you also didn't want to keep this job, apparently. As I tied my apron back into place, I heard a notification ping from one of the server's phones. Oh my God! Someone gasped. The video was already up. My stomach dropped. Look at this caption. The teen server laughed. Another bleeding heart waitress trying to go viral. My hands curled into fists. It wasn't just ridicule. It was misinterpretation, rewriting what happened in a way that made me look pathetic instead of human. For a second, I wanted to shout, to explain, to defend myself. But what good would it do? People saw what they wanted to see. Diner customers wanted their breakfast without discomfort. Teenagers wanted a cheap laugh. Corporate wanted compliance. And I was just the server who didn't know her place. My shift felt twice as long after that. The old man had left quietly without a word, and somewhere between cleaning tables and restocking napkins, the warmth I felt from helping him faded into exhaustion. When the clock finally hit 3, I grabbed my coat and slipped out the back door, avoiding the front where customers could stare at me again. The cold hit me immediately, a slap of wind that stole my breath. I pulled my jacket tighter as I walked toward the bus stop. The snow was falling harder now, each flake stinging my cheeks. I climbed onto the bus, sat in the back, and stared out the window while the city blurred past. When I got home, the apartment lights were off except for the flickering television. My father was slumped in his recliner, a half-empty bottle on the floor beside him. The room smelled like stale beer and the kind of sadness you don't talk about. He looked at me when I closed the door. His eyes were red, not from crying, but from everything else. You're late, he grumbled. Again. I had a rough shift, I said softly. Someone needed help, he scoffed. Help? You think helping strangers pays the rent. You think your kindness is going to keep the lights on. His words hit me harder than Rita's had. I stood in the kitchen doorway, fingers gripping the frame to steady myself. Dad, I'm trying my best. He pointed at the unpaid electric bill pinned to the fridge with a magnet. Your best won't keep this house warm, Mara. I turned away before he could see the tears forming. I stood at the sink, staring at my reflection in the dark window, my breath fogging the glass. Maybe he was right. Maybe kindness didn't matter. Maybe all it did was get you written up at work and laughed at by strangers. But as I pressed my palms to the counter, fighting the ache in my chest, an image flashed in my mind. The old man cupping the hot chocolate steam rising around his shaking hands. The way he had looked at me like I had given him something far bigger than $5. I didn't know then that he was still thinking about me too, or that he had seen far more than I realized. If I had known what was coming, I would have held on to that moment a little tighter, because that simple act of defiance, that 7 minutes of stubborn compassion, had already set something in motion that none of us could see yet, and everything was about to change. 3 days passed before I saw him again, though if you had asked me, then I would have sworn the world had already moved on. People forget fast in a town like ours. But on the third morning of my shift, when the snow outside had finally hardened into glassy drifts and the diner smelled like burnt toast and overworked coffee pots, the bell above the door chimed and my entire body went still. At first, I didn't recognize him. No part of me connected the man who walked in with the shivering figure I had defended days earlier. This man stood tall, not hunched. His coat was a deep charcoal wool, tailored and clean, with a collar that rested neatly around his neck. His shoes were polished, his beard trimmed, his posture steady. But it was the eyes that gave him away. They were the same eyes that had looked at me with embarrassment and gratitude and disbelief while steam rose from a cup of hot chocolate. Now they watched me with something else entirely. Awareness. Intention. I froze with a stack of menus in my hands, unsure whether to walk toward him or run the other way. He moved first, stepping slowly through the diner, ignoring the curious looks from customers who clearly sensed he didn't belong among the cracked vinyl booths and the hum of a flickering neon sign. He walked with the calm certainty of someone who rarely had to hurry. When he reached the same booth he had occupied before, he didn't sit immediately. Instead, he waited until my feet carried me almost unwillingly to his table. Good morning. I said, my voice a little thinner than I intended. He nodded politely. Then he sat. I placed a menu in front of him, though I had the sense he wasn't here for food. Coffee? I asked out of habit. I'm not here to order, he said softly. I only came to ask you one question. My throat tightened. Questions could mean many things, and most of them led to trouble. But he didn't look angry or offended. He looked curious, almost gentle. Why did you help me? He asked. His voice didn't accuse. It didn't assume. It simply asked. I looked down at my apron, suddenly aware of every stain, every crease. I thought of all the times people had looked at me and decided I was less than them. I thought of my mother in that grocery store aisle apologizing for being poor. I thought of my father's words 2 nights ago telling me kindness didn't pay the rent. Because no one else would, I said finally. The truth sat on my tongue, heavier than any explanation I could have rehearsed. And because I've seen what it feels like when people look at you and only see a problem to remove. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look away. So I kept talking. When I was a kid, someone helped my mom when she fainted at market. One woman, just one. But it kept my mother from collapsing alone. I guess I'm still trying to repay that moment, even if it's to a stranger. For a moment, he didn't move. His expression softened, that quiet kind of softening that came from somewhere deeper than politeness. A waiter behind me dropped a fork, and the clatter made me jump, but he remained still, absorbing every word. Then he reached for the small paper napkin from the metal holder on the table. He took a pen from the inside pocket of his coat, scribbled something quickly, then folded the napkin once and slid it across the table toward me. Thank you, he said simply, not with the shaky gratitude he had shown the last time. This was steadier, more knowing. He stood up, buttoned his coat. looked at me like he was memorizing something. Then he walked out without waiting for me to respond, without glancing at anyone else. Customers tracked him with their eyes whispering about how much money he must have had, how strange it was that someone so well-dressed came here. They asked questions I had no answers to. I didn't respond. Instead, I unfolded the napkin. 4 words were written in clean, careful handwriting. Your heart remembers what this world forgets. I stared at the sentence until the edges of the napkin blurred. It didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like recognition, like he had seen something in me that I had spent most of my life trying to hide from the world and from myself. I tucked the napkin into my apron pocket as if it were something fragile, something I needed to protect. During my break, I walked outside behind the diner, leaning against the brick wall where the wind couldn't cut as sharply. I held the napkin again, reading the words over and over, trying to understand why they felt heavier than any insult I had received that week. I didn't know if I would ever see him again. I didn't know who he really was, or why he had returned looking like a completely different man. But something about the way he spoke, the way he listened, the way he wrote those words made me feel that what happened between us wasn't over. Not even close. I didn't know then that his return was only the beginning, or that what came next would pull me into a world I had never imagined stepping into. 3 days ago, I helped a stranger. Today, he walked in like a man with a purpose. And tomorrow, without knowing it, I would take my first step toward a life I had never dared to believe could be mine. If I had understood any of that, I might have been afraid. But all I had was a napkin folded in my apron and a feeling in my chest I couldn't name. A feeling that told me nothing about my life would be ordinary again. 3 evenings later, when the snow had finally softened into slush and the streetlights outside my apartment buzzed like tired insects, I found the envelope. It was sitting on the floor, just inside my door, pale ivory against the worn hardwood, as if someone had slid it under and walked away without leaving a trace. I stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. My name was written across the front in elegant handwriting, the kind you only see on wedding invitations or formal award ceremonies, not in the hallway of a rundown apartment building where the heat clicked off every hour to save money. There was no return address, no logo, no explanation. My heart thudded once too hard, like it was trying to warn me or prepare me, I couldn't tell which. Inside was a single card. Thick, heavy, embossed at the top with an unfamiliar symbol, a stylized crest with interlocking letters. Beneath it, printed in gold ink, was a message. You are invited to the Lakefront Crest Resort for a private conversation. Ask for the Hartwell Suite. The room will be expecting you. No date, no signature, just a time, tomorrow, 5 o'clock. For a moment, I wondered if one of my coworkers was playing some kind of cruel joke, but none of them knew my address. And none of them wrote like this. My fingers gripped the card so tightly it bent at the edges. I sat on the edge of my bed trying to breathe normally, but my mind spun in frantic circles. Was this from him, the old man? Or rather, the not old, not homeless, not what he seemed man who had walked back into the diner looking like he belonged in a boardroom instead of a booth? Part of me told myself I shouldn't go, that nothing good comes from being summoned to a luxury resort by a stranger, that I had bills, shifts, responsibilities, a life that didn't include mysterious invitations from men who wrote on napkins like poets. But another part, a smaller and quieter part, whispered something else. He didn't hurt you. He didn't mock you. He didn't forget you. And those 4 words he left behind, they didn't feel like the end of anything. That whisper won. The next day after my shift, I took the bus toward the resort. The lakefront crest sat on a hill overlooking the water, all silver glass and warm lights that made it look like a lighthouse meant for the wealthy. I felt painfully out of place walking into the lobby in my thrift store coat and worn boots. Guests in tailored suits drifted past me without a glance. A pianist played something delicate that floated through the air like it was too refined to touch the ground. I approached the front desk, trying to hide how sweaty my palms were. I began. I think I'm supposed to ask for the Hartwell Suite. The concierge didn't blink. Of course, she said, as if she had been waiting. Right this way. She escorted me to a private elevator with a keycard reader. When the doors opened on the top floor, a hallway stretched before me, quiet and carpeted, lit by soft sconces. She gestured to the door at the end. He's expecting you. He made my pulse jump. I walked toward the door, each step melting into the carpet without a sound. I wasn't sure I could turn the handle. I wasn't sure I should. But I did. The suite opened into a room larger than my entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark waves of the lake. And standing near the window, hands clasped loosely in front of him, was the man whose life I had stepped into without meaning to. He turned when he heard the door. No coat, no trembling, no disguise. The warm light caught the silver strands in his hair, made the lines at the corners of his eyes look softer, more human. He smiled gently. "Mara," he said, as if we had known each other for years. "Thank you for coming." I stood frozen by the door. "Why am I here?" I finally managed. "What is this?" He motioned to a seat near the window. "Please, sit. I want to tell you who I am, properly this time." I sat because my legs were too weak not to. He remained standing for a moment, gathering his thoughts with an air of reluctant formality, as if he hated the idea of introducing himself the way wealthy men are expected to. "My name," he said at last, "is Elias Hartwell." The name landed like a stone in the room. I knew it. Everyone in Michigan knew it. Hartwell, as in Hartwell Foundation, Hartwell Scholarships, Hartwell Children's Centers, Hartwell Grants, Hartwell Investment Group, a man whose reach touched almost every corner of the state, a man who never showed his face on television, a man people whispered about without knowing the truth. I stared at him, my breath caught in my chest. He nodded as if understanding the shock. "I didn't lie to you," he said calmly, "but I also didn't tell you. The morning we met, I wore what I always wear when I want to move through the world unseen. I don't enjoy the way people change when they recognize my name." He walked toward the window again, gazing out at the shimmering lake. "Sometimes I go out dressed simply anonymously. I like to see life without filters, to understand how the world treats someone with nothing to offer." He turned back to me. "But you didn't hesitate. Not because you thought I was wealthy. Not because you expected anything. You didn't even know my name." He paused, his voice quieting. "I wanted to thank you. And I wanted to see if the woman who helped me when everyone else turned away was someone I could speak to. Honestly." My heart felt too big for my ribs, too loud, too breakable. I swallowed. "So this wasn't a test?" "No," he said softly. "I wasn't testing your character. I was searching for something I thought I'd stopped seeing in people." Something in the way he said it made my throat tighten. A sadness, a history, a story I didn't know yet. I didn't understand then what he wanted from me, or what he was hoping I would say, or why I felt both terrified and strangely safe sitting across from him. I only knew one thing, whatever this was. It wasn't over. Not even close. And the fire he had just lit in my quiet, ordinary life was about to burn much brighter than I could imagine. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. The room felt too big, the air too still, and every word Elias had spoken was still echoing inside my head like it was bouncing off the glass walls. I should have felt honored, grateful, starstruck even. People lived their whole lives without ever sharing a room with someone like him. But all I felt was a pressure building in my chest, sharp and hot, pushing against my ribs like it wanted out. I stood up, almost knocking the chair back. "So, what was I supposed to do?" My voice cracked harder than I wanted it to. "Thank you for showing up dressed like a completely different person. Thank you for watching me get written up at work. Thank you for slipping an invitation under my door like we're in some kind of mystery novel." Elias's expression faltered. Not offended. Surprised. Like he hadn't expected anger. Like no one had raised their voice to him in a very long time. "Mara," he began gently, "I didn't want to cause you trouble, but you did." I shot back. "You walked into my life. Let me help you disappeared. Reappeared. Looking like a magazine ad asked me deep questions like, 'You knew me, and now you bring me here and tell me your name.' Like it's supposed to explain everything." My breath shook. It doesn't explain anything. He pressed his lips together, eyes dropping for a moment as if he were choosing his next words carefully. Too carefully. I understand why you feel overwhelmed, he said softly. Overwhelmed, I laughed, but the sound came out brittle. That's one word for it. I turned away from him, looking out at the lake. The waves hit the shore in slow, tired strokes, and the city lights shivered on the water's surface. My reflection stared back at me in the window, a woman with messy hair and second-hand boots, standing inside a world that was not meant for her. Do you know what it felt like? I whispered. Seeing you come into the diner looking like a completely different person. Like the man I helped didn't exist. Like I imagined everything. No, Elias said quietly. The man you helped absolutely existed. Yeah. I turned back to him. Which one? The man with torn gloves, or the man in a suite that costs more per night than I make in a month? His shoulders sagged a little. Both, he said. They're both me. I felt the anger surge again before I could stop it. You get to choose that. You get to step in and out of struggle like trying on clothes. People like me don't get that luxury. We don't get to disappear into a better version of ourselves whenever the world gets too harsh. We don't get to observe suffering from a distance. We're stuck in it. For the first time, Elias looked wounded. His jaw tightened, not with arrogance, but with something heavier. He slowly walked toward one of the armchairs and sat down, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped loosely. He didn't look powerful then. He looked tired. You're right, he said. The admission was simple quiet, but it cut through the air like a knife. I didn't grow up poor. I don't know what it's like to miss rent or choose between groceries and heat. I don't pretend to. His eyes lifted to meet mine. But I do know Las Mara. The room shifted. Something in the way he said it made my anger loosen its grip just a little. Elias took a breath. My wife died 15 years ago. Cancer. It happened fast. Too fast to understand. And when she was gone, so was every part of my life that felt anchored to something real. His voice didn't break. It didn't tremble. But there was a hollowness in it, a quiet ache that felt more painful than any tears. People treated me differently after that, he continued. Some pitied me. Some wanted something from me. Some pretended to understand so they could get closer to my money. But no one talked to me like a human being anymore. He looked at the floor, almost embarrassed by the confession. So I started going out as someone else, not to spy on people or test anyone. Just to see the world the way she used to see it. Plainly. Honestly. Without the distortion of my name. My throat tightened. Hard. He wasn't manipulating me. He wasn't playing a part. He was telling the truth the way people do when they are exhausted from holding it in. I leaned against the windowsill, my anger cooling into something softer. Something like recognition. I'm sorry, I said quietly. And I was. Not because his wealth excused anything, but because grief recognizes grief no matter the income bracket. He nodded slowly. I don't blame you for being upset. I should have approached you differently. More respectfully. We stayed quiet for a moment, the air between us shifting. Not dissolving the tension, but letting it breathe. Then I said, So, why me? Why invite me here? He hesitated. Because you did for me what no one else has done in a long time, he said. You saw me. Not the version of me that everyone else sees. Not the wealth, not the reputation, not the donations or the name engraved on a dozen buildings. You saw the human part. I didn't know what to say to that. He continued, and after I left the diner, after I looked at that napkin in my pocket, I realized I wanted to talk to you again. Not as a benefactor. Not as a stranger pretending to be someone else. Just as a man who felt something that day that he hasn't felt in years. A pause. Hope. I felt my heart shift in my chest like someone had moved it slightly out of place. Enough to notice. Enough to feel. I stepped forward, not close enough to bridge the space between us, but close enough that I didn't have to raise my voice. I'm still angry, I admitted. I know, he said. I would be too, and I don't trust you yet. Good. You shouldn't. That startled a small breath out of me, something almost like a laugh. He smiled faintly. But I'm here, he said, and I hope you'll let me explain more. Not because you owe me anything, but because I think we both need something honest right now. I didn't know what this was turning into. A conversation, a confrontation, a beginning. But I knew one thing. Something in me had shifted again. Not forgiveness, not acceptance. Just the faintest sense that maybe despite everything, this man wasn't someone I needed to run from. He might even be someone I needed to understand. I didn't realize it then, but this moment, the anger, the honesty, the raw edges of two very different lives brushing against each other was the turning point. The moment when everything that came after became possible. And nothing about my life would ever be simple again. The letter arrived 2 days after I left the Hartwell suite, tucked between my electric bill and a takeout menu, as if it were just another piece of mail instead of the thing that would drag my life in a direction I never expected. I almost missed it. The envelope was plain this time, no gold crest, no embossed lettering, just my name written in the same steady handwriting I had seen on the napkin. I opened it at the kitchen counter while my father snored in the recliner, the TV flickering across his face. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded once. Mara, I hope you are safe and warm tonight. I didn't say everything I meant to say during our last conversation. I'm traveling next week to several places that mattered to my wife. Places where I try to continue the work she cared about. Wisconsin, Vermont, Toronto. I would like you to join me not as an assistant or an employee, but as someone whose honesty I value more than you know. No expectations. No obligations, only conversation and company if you choose. Elias. There was no check inside, no promise of opportunity, not even a hint of romance or flattery. Just a train ticket. One way to Madison leaving Saturday morning. I stared at it unsure whether to laugh or tear it in half. The idea was ridiculous. Me getting on a train with a man I barely knew. Me leaving the diner, the bills, my father's anger, the life I had been holding together with cheap duct tape and pure stubbornness. And yet something deep inside me stirred something I hadn't felt in years. Wanting, not for luxury or escape, for space, for a breath that didn't taste like exhaustion. I folded the letter and shoved it into my coat pocket, trying to pretend it didn't spark anything. But that night, when I sat in bed with the lamp on low, reading the same paragraph of a novel over and over without absorbing a single word, I knew I wasn't going to sleep. I kept replaying our last conversation. His raw honesty, the way his voice cracked when he talked about his wife, the way he admitted he didn't want me to trust him too quickly. People in my world never said things like that. They hid, they deflected, they lied to themselves and called it surviving. The next morning, I found myself washing dishes slowly, letting the hot water turn my hands red just so I could feel something other than indecision. When my father stumbled into the kitchen, eyes bleary, he noticed the ticket sitting on the counter. "What's that?" he grunted. Nothing, I said, quickly snatching it up, but he stepped closer, squinting. "You going somewhere?" His voice sharpened with suspicion, the same suspicion he used when he thought I was keeping something from him. I shoved the ticket into a drawer. "It's nothing you need to worry about. You think you can just run off," he snapped. "Leave me here. Who's going to take care of the bills?" "The house." "Me." I clenched my jaw. "I'm taking care of everything now." He scoffed. "Barely." I turned away before he could see my face crumble. I grabbed my coat and walked out, ignoring his voice echoing down the hallway. I didn't stop walking until I reached my Aunt Diana's small, cluttered townhouse on the south side. She opened the door wearing her fuzzy robe and an expression that said she already knew I was carrying something heavy. "Come in," she said. "You look like someone wrung you out." We sat at her table with 2 chipped mugs of tea. I pulled out the letter. "It's from that man I told you about," I said. "He wants me to go with him, on a trip, to see places his wife loved." Diana read the letter twice. Then she leaned back and tapped the table thoughtfully. "Do you want to go?" "I don't know," I whispered. "I'm scared. Of him. Of myself. Of leaving. Of what people will think. Of what happens if I trust the wrong person." She reached across the table and took my hand. "Listen to me. Good people always doubt themselves. Always. Bad people don't hesitate. They take and take because they think the world owes them. But you You think too much about whether you deserve something. That's why you don't chase anything. That's why you stay stuck." Her thumb brushed the back of my hand the way my mother used to when I was little. "Maybe it's time you stop asking whether you're worth the opportunity," she said softly. "Maybe start asking whether the opportunity is worth you." My breath caught. No one had ever phrased it like that, not once in my entire life. That night, I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the shudder of the furnace, the muffled arguments of my neighbors through the thin walls, and I realized something painful. If I didn't go, nothing in my life would change. Not my job, not my father, not the way I bent myself until I cracked under the weight of everyone's needs but my own. And if I did go, I didn't know. But for the first time, I wanted to find out. When the sun rose pale and cold through the frosted window, I packed a small bag, 2 sweaters, 1 pair of jeans, a journal, and the napkin with his words. My hands trembled as I locked the apartment door behind me. At the station, the train hissed as it waited steam rising around it like a creature trying to wake from sleep. I stepped toward it with my heart refusing to beat evenly. Elias was already there, standing by one of the passenger cars, hands in his pockets, wearing a simple dark jacket that made him look almost ordinary. He smiled when he saw me. Not a triumphant smile, not relief, just something warm, human. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I didn't think I would either," I admitted. The truth tasted frightening. Liberating. He nodded at the train doors. "There's no promise on the other side of this," he said. "No reward, no expectation. Just company. And perhaps a little honesty." I met his eyes. They weren't the eyes of a man trying to take something from me. They were the eyes of someone trying to carry something with me. "Then let's go," I said quietly. And for the first time in my life, I stepped onto a path that wasn't forced on me by survival fear or obligation. A path I chose. I didn't know then how much it would change me, how much he would change me, how much I would change myself. But as the train pulled away from the station, rattling gently beneath my feet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Our first day on the road didn't feel magical. It felt awkward, quiet, uncertain. The kind of quiet where 2 people don't know how to sit beside each other without wondering if they made a mistake. The train hummed beneath us steady and rhythmic, almost like it was keeping time with my heartbeat. I sat by the window watching the trees blur past tall black silhouettes against the pale Midwestern sky. Elias sat across from me reading something in a weathered journal he kept half hidden. Every once in a while he glanced up as if he wanted to speak, then changed his mind. I didn't blame him. I felt the same. But around noon, when the train stopped at a small transfer station in Wisconsin and the cold slapped our faces the moment we stepped off, something softened between us. He offered me his scarf, the same one he'd worn the day I first saw him in the diner. I shook my head. "You'll freeze without it." He smiled a little. "I'm old, not fragile." I didn't take it, but the offer warmed something in me that the scarf couldn't. We rented a car and drove past stretches of frosted farmland until we reached a small community center on the edge of a quiet town. The building looked like nothing special old brick peeling paint a parking lot half covered in snow. But inside the moment we walked through the door, children rushed toward him. Real, loud, chaotic children. "Uncle Eli," they shouted. Not Elias, not Mr. Hartwell. Uncle Eli. One of them, a little girl with missing teeth, hugged him so tightly his coat bunched up around her shoulders. He hugged her back with equal strength. I froze, stunned. This man had walked into the diner like a ghost, pale, fragile, diminished. But here, surrounded by sticky hands and unbrushed hair and the smell of crayons, he wasn't a ghost. He was alive, fully, absolutely alive. A woman with tired but kind eyes walked toward us. "Elias, thank God you're here. The furnace is acting up again." He put his hands on her shoulders lightly. "We'll figure it out," he said. "It's just a building. These kids are the important ones." I watched him kneel on the floor with the children, helping them piece together a giant cardboard puzzle. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't performing for a camera or donors or the community. His voice softened when he spoke to them. His eyes lit up when they told him stories about their day. Not once did he mention his name. his foundation, or that he was the reason their center stayed open. No one here saw him as a billionaire. They saw him as someone who cared, and he liked it that way. Later, when the kids went outside to play in the snow, warmth had settled into the room, faint and gentle. I found Elias in the supply closet repairing a broken heater with sleeves rolled up, hair slightly mussed. Not like a man who had hundreds of millions in assets. More like a man who had grown up doing things himself. "So, this is what you do?" I asked. He looked up. "Some of it," he said. "But this part matters most. Showing up. You don't put your name on things." He shrugged. My wife hated that. She believed the only kindness worth anything is the kind done quietly. He tightened a screw, then stood brushing dust from his hands. "She used to say that if people know it was you, half the meaning is already lost." The way he said it, soft, reverent, made me feel like he was confiding in me without even meaning to. Later that evening, as we drove toward Vermont, the sky bruised into a deep winter blue, he finally spoke more freely. Not about money, not about his reputation, but about her. She was the one who taught me how to see people, he said. Not who they pretend to be, but who they are underneath. Snow drifted across the headlights like glitter. When she died, everyone treated me differently. They either pitied me or expected something from me. But she used to sit in places like your diner for hours just to observe people. She said everyday life was where the truth lived. His voice wavered. "Just a little. Traveling to these places helps me remember her without collapsing." I felt something shift inside me again. Not in a romantic way, not in a way that made me want to reach for him, but in a human way, a way that recognized loneliness, grief, and the kind of longing that doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. We reached the Vermont cabin late at night. The snow was deep around the porch steps untouched. The sky was dark except for one lantern flickering near the door. Inside the cabin was small but warm, a fireplace crackling softly. I sat on the couch while Elias boiled water for tea, moving slowly, quietly, as if afraid to break the peace of the place. When he handed me a mug, our fingers brushed. Not intentionally, not meaningfully, just enough to make me look up. "This place mattered to her," he said softly. "She used to say it made the world feel gentle again." I sipped my tea, feeling the warmth spread down my throat. "It is gentle," I whispered, "and rare." We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. He sat in the armchair by the fire. I curled into a blanket on the couch, and the silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was the kind that felt like breathing together, honest, unforced. At some point, I opened my journal and started writing. Words came out in uneven lines. I don't know who I'm becoming, but maybe that's okay. Across the room, Elias looked at the fire the same way I looked at him earlier, like he didn't fully understand what was happening inside him, but he wasn't afraid to feel it. I closed my journal and watched the flames dance. I didn't know what this journey meant yet. I didn't know what he wanted from me beyond conversation and honesty. But sitting there, wrapped in warmth I hadn't asked for, I felt something unfamiliar. Not romance, not admiration, something quieter. Recognition. Two people carrying scars too old to name, finding an echo in each other they didn't expect. For the first time, it didn't scare me. It just felt real. We reached the cabin just after sunset, the sky already sinking into that deep winter blue that makes the world feel smaller, quieter, like it's folded into itself for warmth. The porch light flickered as we climbed the wooden steps, casting a trembling glow across the snow. Elias pushed the door open, and a soft wave of heat drifted out, carrying the scent of pine-old books and something faintly sweet, like honey melted into wood over decades. I stepped inside, pulling my coat tight around me, though the warmth hit almost instantly. The cabin was small, just one open room with a worn leather armchair by the fireplace, a narrow kitchen, and a loft bed tucked above with a crooked ladder leading up. The fire snapped softly, throwing orange light across the floor. Elias walked in behind me and closed the door gently, as if afraid to disturb the quiet. "She loved this place," he said after a beat, removing his gloves slowly. "My wife. We spent nearly every winter here." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to respond to a sentence that held so much more than the words themselves. He lit a few lanterns around the room, their glow pooling gently over the walls. When he finished, he looked different. Not older, not sadder, more bare. Like the truth lived easier on him here. I set my bag down beside the couch. "It's beautiful," I said quietly. "Peaceful." "She said it made the world feel gentle," he replied. Like grief had softer edges here. Something tightened in my chest. I had never heard anyone talk about grief like that. Soft edges. Mine had always felt sharp. I took a seat on the couch. Elias moved to the kitchen, put water on to boil, and for a moment the only sound was the whistle of the wind skimming across the cabin roof. He spoke without turning around. "You can ask me anything tonight." "If you want." I didn't answer right away. I watched his back, the way his shoulders rose and fell steady, but not as certain as he pretended. "Why bring me here?" I finally asked. He didn't turn. "Because I didn't know I needed someone to talk to until you spoke to me the way you did." "Angry." He shook his head. "Honest." He poured the water into 2 mugs and carried them to the small table by the couch. I cupped the mug between my palms. The heat stung my cold fingers in a way that felt alive. What was she like, I asked. The question left me before I could think better of it. He sat down across from me slowly, as if lowering his grief into the chair beside him. "She was quiet," he said at last, "but not soft, not fragile. She had this way of seeing people, really seeing them. The kind of woman who remembered names, noticed when someone was tired, asked the question that mattered instead of the one that was easy." He looked down at his hands, and she believed that money only mattered if it made someone's burden lighter. The fire cracked behind us. I felt myself leaning in, not physically but internally, toward the tenderness in his voice. "Did you come here after she passed?" I asked. He nodded. "For years. I couldn't stand the house. Everything reminded me of her. This place hurt too, but gentler. His wife had died. My mother had left a different kind of absence in my life, but the ache was familiar enough that our grief recognized each other's. I realized then that this wasn't a man chasing pity or admiration. This was a man trying not to drown in the silence he lived with every day. He looked up at me suddenly. "Tell me something real," he said. "About you." I hesitated. No one asked me things like that. Not at the diner, not at home. People talked at me, not to me. "I'm tired," I said finally. "Not the kind of tired sleep fixes. The kind where you keep trying to hold everyone else together until you forget how to hold yourself." He didn't interrupt. So I kept going. "My father, he's not cruel. He's just broken. And I've spent years trying to mend things I didn't break. Sometimes I feel like if I stop trying, everything will collapse. But if I keep trying, I will." My voice cracked. I hated that it did. But he didn't look away. He didn't pity. He simply listened the same way he had listened to the children earlier without wanting anything from me except truth. He leaned back in his chair. "I don't need someone to love me," he said softly. "I need someone who understands why I love the things I do, someone who understands the parts of me that the world can't see." I swallowed. "I'm not sure I'm that person." "I'm not asking you to be," he said quickly. "I'm asking if you understand what I mean." I nodded. "Yes," I whispered. "I do." The fire dimmed slightly. The air thickened with a kind of quiet that wasn't awkward, wasn't heavy. It was the quiet of 2 people who had stopped pretending they weren't hurting. Elias stood and walked to the bookshelf. He pulled down a small wooden box and set it between us. "She carved this," he said, every time she felt overwhelmed. He opened it and handed me a small wooden token. One word was carved into it in delicate script. "Breathe." The word hit me harder than it should have. My eyes stung and I blinked quickly, embarrassed. "You can keep it," he said. I shook my head. "I can't." "You already did," he replied softly. He stood and walked to the window. Snow fell thick and slow, the world outside going still. "I brought you here," he said without turning around, because I thought, maybe if you saw the places she loved, if you saw the world she asked me to continue caring for, maybe I could remember how to live the way she wanted me to. I didn't know what to say, not to a confession like that. not to the kind of vulnerability that felt like he was handing me something fragile and irreplaceable. I didn't touch him. I didn't go to him. I just whispered the only truth I had. I'm glad I came. He turned, and the look on his face wasn't hope. It wasn't longing. It was recognition. The recognition of someone who realized they weren't walking through their grief alone anymore. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks upward. I wrapped myself tighter in the blanket. I didn't know what this journey was turning into. Not romance, not friendship, not anything easily labeled. But whatever it was honest, and that alone felt rare enough to hold on to. We left the cabin the next morning while the world was still half asleep, the sky a pale wash of gray-blue, the kind that makes everything look softer than it really is. Elias loaded the car with quiet efficiency, brushing frost off the windshield while I stood on the porch holding a thermos of coffee he'd brewed before dawn. Something about the way the cold bit the air made the moment feel delicate, like if either of us spoke too loudly it would shatter. The drive into the next town was long, the roads winding through forests that looked like they were holding their breath under the weight of winter. I watched the snow-covered pines blur past while my thoughts churned louder than the engine. I didn't fully understand why he had brought me here, or why I had come, but the longer I sat beside him, the more I realized something dangerous. I wanted the person he was showing me to be real. When we pulled into Detroit later that afternoon, our next stop, I wasn't prepared for the contrast. The Hartwell Center for Women had none of the quiet charm of the Vermont cabin. It was loud, crowded, chaotic. Women of all ages hustled through narrow hallways, carrying boxes, pushing strollers, juggling paperwork. The walls were lined with posters about job training child care assistance recovery programs. A bulletin board near the entrance overflowed with handwritten notes. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for giving me a place to start over. Thank you for giving me back my name. As soon as we walked in, a young woman with a toddler on her hip approached Elias. Mr. Hartwell, she breathed relief flooding her face. Thank God. The shipment of supplies is short by half. If we can't cover it, I'll speak to the director, he said gently. We'll fix it. She nodded quickly, squeezing his hand before rushing off. They know you, I murmured. Not your money. You. That's the goal, he said. Money doesn't change people's lives. Access does. He spoke with a calm certainty I admired more than I wanted to admit. He took me on a quiet tour through the center. Women sorting donated clothes. Women practicing interviews in a bright yellow room with chairs arranged like a small classroom. Women cooking in an industrial kitchen that smelled like garlic onions and something warm I couldn't name. I noticed right away that not one wall had his name on it. Not one plaque. Not one sign. This whole place existed because of him, and no one here worshipped him for it. They simply leaned on him the way you lean on a sturdy railing when climbing a steep set of stairs. Not because you're weak, but because the world is heavy. After an hour, he led me into a small storage room filled with canned goods and boxes of hygiene kits. He leaned against the metal shelving, arms crossed loosely. Your turn, he said. My turn for what? To tell me what you saw. I hesitated. I saw women who feel safe, women who aren't being judged, women who know they matter. He nodded slowly, thoughtfully. But what did you feel? That question caught me in the chest. I pressed the tips of my fingers into one of the cardboard boxes. I felt small, I admitted. Not because I don't belong here, but because I never realized how big the world is. How much good can be done if someone actually tries. He tilted his head. You're doing good every day. I serve pancakes, I said bitterly. You serve safe places. Mara, he said, stepping closer. Not too close, but close enough that I couldn't escape the truth in his voice. You didn't help me for what I could give you. You helped me because that's who you are. People like you are exactly who places like this need. My throat tightened. Then why am I terrified of stepping into anything bigger than what I know? He softened. Because no one ever told you you're allowed to. The words landed deep, sharp, true. I didn't know whether to thank him or walk out before I cried, but the conversation didn't end there, not even close. He reached into his coat and pulled out a slim folder, no thicker than a few sheets of paper. I've been thinking about this for a while, he said, even before I invited you on this trip. He held it out. My hands didn't move. What is it? A proposal, he said. For you. My pulse lurched. Not money, he added quickly, sensing my panic. An idea. My fingers twitched, finally reaching. I opened the folder slowly. Inside was a simple blueprint of a small cafe. Cozy, warm, with shelves of books, big windows, and an open table meant for community events. Underneath the drawing, typed neatly, was the name he had given the idea, the Anchor Room. I stared at it, my breath stuck in my lungs. What is this, a community cafe, he said, not owned by me, not funded by me alone. A place where people can sit without being judged for what's in their wallet. A place that offers training support connection. His eyes softened. A place built the way you helped me that morning. Quiet, true, without conditions. My voice came out barely audible. But why me? Because you see people? He said simply. Most don't. And I think you could build something that mirrors the kindness you carry. The folder trembled in my hands. I can't run something like this. I didn't ask you to run it, he said. I asked if you want to help build it. Step by step, grant by grant, choice by choice. I closed the folder, unable to keep staring at the possibility sitting in my lap. My voice cracked. I'm not enough for this. He stepped closer, not touching me, but steadying the air around me. You are exactly enough. That's why I brought the idea to you. The words hit me like a collision. Hope slammed into fear, excitement into disbelief, strength into doubt, emotional undulation so sharp it stole my breath. I couldn't take it, not all at once. I'm sorry, I whispered. I need time. He nodded immediately. No disappointment, no pressure. Just understanding. Take all the time you need. As we drove away from the center that night, the lights glowing behind us like little lanterns of resilience, I held the folder in my hands and felt something shift so deeply I didn't know what to do with it. For the first time in my life, someone saw not just who I was, but who I might become. I stared out the window at the falling snow, whispering to myself the truth I wasn't ready to say aloud. Maybe I'm the one who needs to believe it first. And the road stretched ahead, quiet and endless, waiting for my answer. I left Elias the next morning before the sun had fully risen, before I could lose my nerve. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't ask for a decision. He simply thanked me for the days we'd shared and watched me step onto the bus heading back to Michigan, his breath fogging in the cold air as the door closed between us. The folder sat in my bag like a weight. Not a burden, more like something too precious, too breakable for hands that had never held anything fragile before. By the time the bus pulled into my neighborhood, the familiar grayness of my life wrapped around me again. The cracked sidewalks, the flickering street lamps, the sound of someone arguing 2 floors up. It all pressed down on me, reminding me what I came from. What I was, what I thought I was. My father was asleep when I walked in, an empty bottle on the floor and the TV still humming with static. The air smelled of stale beer and hopelessness. I stepped around him quietly and went to my room, sinking to the floor with my back against the bed. I pulled the blueprint from the folder again. The Anchor Room. My name wasn't anywhere on it, but somehow it felt like it was. A small cafe with warm lighting shelves of donated books, a corner for live music, a community table for anyone who needed a place to sit. No loitering signs, no shame. No one turned away for being human. I traced the edges of the paper with trembling fingers. Something inside me whispered soft but relentless, "You could build this." But another voice, the louder one I'd listened to my whole life, fought back. "You can't. You're a waitress. You're poor. You're exhausted. You don't belong in rooms where people build anything." The war inside me kept me awake the whole night. By morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't ready to say yes to anything big, but I could start something small, something mine. So I opened my laptop, the old one that overheated every 20 minutes, and typed, "How to start a community cafe on a budget." That search changed the next 3 months of my life. First, I picked up extra shifts at the diner. Ironic, I know. The place where everything had started was now where I scraped together every spare dollar. I braided kindness into my work, even when no one noticed. I saved tip after tip, no matter how small. Next, I sold baked goods at the church down the street, my mother's recipes. Cinnamon rolls so warm they felt like memory. People bought them because they reminded them of someone they missed. I saved that money too. After that, I visited local nonprofits, community organizers, anyone who would listen. I applied for microgrants. Most turned me down gently, some harshly. One woman looked me up and down and said, "People like you don't open things. They work in things." I didn't tell her that the man funding half the city's shelters believed otherwise. I kept going. I met with a retired carpenter who agreed to help me find cheap furniture. A friend of a friend donated mismatched chairs. A former art teacher offered to paint a mural. I found a closed-down laundromat on the corner of Maple and 3rd. The landlord was desperate enough to rent it for almost nothing. It smelled like mildew. The lights flickered. The floor was a disaster. But when I stepped inside, I saw it. The whole thing. Warm tables, shelves of books, a piano in the corner, strangers finding rest, dignity, a first cup that belonged to everybody. I stood in that empty space for a long time, my breath fogging in the cold air, and whispered, "I'm doing this." Even if no one believed in me, even if I had to build it brick by brick, even if I had to clean every inch myself. And I did. I scrubbed floors until my knees ached, hauled furniture from Craigslist, repainted walls twice after the first coat dried the wrong color. I worked double shifts, slept 4 hours a night, and cried into the sink more than once. But something miraculous happened in the middle of all that exhaustion. People started showing up. The carpenter dropped off a window bench just because. A group of high school kids volunteered to hang lights. A woman from the shelter brought books she didn't need anymore. A neighbor donated a coffee maker they'd barely used. They placed things quietly without fuss, without expecting anything in return. A quiet network of kindness, all woven together by something small and stubborn inside me that refused to give up. The last thing I added was the sign in the window, painted by hand, crooked in the corner, the anchor room, and underneath it in smaller letters, "First cup free, kindness required." I cried when I finished it. Not pretty tears, the kind of tears that come from years of holding everything up alone. Tears that tasted like release. The night before the soft opening, I stayed late sweeping the floor while the soft glow of string lights flickered across the tables. The room felt warm, even without people in it. Alive. Built not from wealth, but from countless small moments where strangers chose to believe in something gentle. My father didn't get it. He still doesn't. But as I locked the door behind me and stood under the streetlight with the winter wind brushing my cheeks, I realized something simple. I had built this. Me. Not because someone powerful handed it to me. Not because I was lucky. But because someone believed I could, and because slowly, painfully, I started to believe it too. And even though I hadn't seen Elias in weeks, somehow in the quiet of that nearly finished space, he felt closer than ever. The morning of the soft opening, I arrived before the sun. The sky was still dark, the kind of deep blue that makes the street lamps look lonely. My breath came out in clouds as I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking not from cold, but from something bigger. Fear, pride, something in between. When I pushed open the door, warm air greeted me mixing with the faint smell of paint, old wood, and freshly ground coffee. The lights I strung across the ceiling glowed softly like constellations I had hung myself. For a moment, I stood in the middle of the room and let myself feel it. This space used to be a broken laundromat. Now it was a place built out of second chances, late nights, and a version of myself I didn't think I could become. But the real test came sooner than I expected. The bell above the door jingled, and I turned ready to greet my first customer with a smile that felt too big for my face. But the man who stepped inside wasn't a customer. Not really. He stood hunched in the doorway, his shoulders dusted with snow, his coat thin, his hands shaking badly enough that the door rattled when he tried to hold it. He looked around the room as if waiting for someone to tell him he didn't belong. And in an instant, the world folded in on itself. I saw him. Not him specifically, but the echo of someone I once helped. Someone everyone else pushed aside because they saw inconvenience instead of humanity. I felt my stomach twist the same way it had that morning in the diner months ago. Before I could speak, one of the teenagers volunteering behind the counter, a sweet boy named Tyler, stepped forward and tried to block the man's path. "Sir, sorry, but this place is for customers only. If you're here to—" I crossed the room so fast, Tyler startled. I laid a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," I said quietly. He looked confused, but the rules, I gave him a small smile. "The only rule is kindness." Tyler's shoulders softened in embarrassment and he stepped aside. I turned to the man who stood frozen eyes wide as if he expected to be thrown out any second. "Would you like a seat by the window?" I asked. My voice didn't shake. He swallowed hard, his eyes filling with a kind of fragile astonishment I recognized all too well. I just need to get warm for a minute," he murmured. "I won't bother anyone. I'll leave after." "You don't have to leave," I said. "You're welcome to stay as long as you want." His lips parted as if he didn't understand the words. I guided him gently to a table near the window where early light had begun to pool. I poured him a cup of coffee, hot, strong, comforting, and placed it in front of him. He wrapped his trembling hands around the mug, steam rising around his face like a small mercy. "How much?" he whispered. "Nothing," I said. "The first cup is always free." He blinked slowly. Why, I lowered myself into the chair across from him for just a moment. "Because everyone deserves warmth," I said. "Everyone deserves to be seen." Something inside him broke at that, not in a painful way, but in the way a frozen river cracks open in spring. His shoulders shook once. He covered his face with a trembling hand. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. I stood and returned to the counter, but not before catching Tyler's eyes. "This," I told him quietly, "is why we're here." He nodded slower this time, his expression softening with something like dawning understanding. The cafe slowly filled with people. Neighbors, volunteers, a few curious strangers who had heard about a new place opening with free coffee. The room grew warm with chatter, laughter, the clinking of mugs. But every so often I glanced toward the man by the window. He sat quietly sipping the coffee in small, grateful movements as if savoring each second of warmth. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel powerless. I felt aligned with who I had been, who I was becoming, who I had always been beneath the exhaustion and fear. I checked on him once more before heading back to serve others. He looked up at me with eyes full of something too heavy and beautiful to name. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not making me feel like nothing." My throat burned. I managed a soft smile. "You're not nothing," I said. "Not here." As I walked away, I felt the weight of the moment settle in my chest, not crushing, but grounding, a full-circle truth blooming quietly. Months ago, I had stood in a diner and refused to let a man be treated like less than human. Today, in a cafe I built from scraped-together dollars and borrowed faith. I did it again, but now with a room full of witnesses who would learn from it. I didn't know if the man would stay or leave after the cup was empty. It didn't matter. What mattered was that for a moment he had warmth. He had dignity. He had someone choose him instead of overlook him. And for the first time, I realized something that made my breath catch. I hadn't just opened a cafe. I had opened a door to the version of myself I had been trying to reach my whole life. I turned back toward my customers, toward the small world I had built with trembling hands, and whispered to myself barely audible above the hum of the room. This is who I was meant to be. The anchor room was alive, and so was I. The snow had thickened by late afternoon, falling in soft, steady curtains that blurred the street outside into a watercolor of gray and gold. Inside the cafe, the lights glowed warm against the windows, turning every table, every cup, every quiet conversation into something that looked almost tender. The soft opening was winding down. A few regulars I didn't know yet lingered near the shelves of books. 2 teenagers played a slow jazz melody on the old piano someone had donated. A mother rocked her baby near the fireplace, humming under her breath. It was exactly what I had dreamed of. Exactly what I had built. And yet, when I stepped into the back room to catch my breath, I felt a strange pull, like something inside me knew. The day wasn't done. Not really. I walked out the front door just to feel the air, just for a moment of stillness. Snowflakes gathered on my coat, melting into cold droplets that slid down my sleeves. I stood under the street lamp watching the lights inside flicker against the glass, watching people find warmth in a space that had once been nothing but an idea I was too afraid to believe in. That's when I saw him. He stood across the street, half hidden under a black umbrella, the snow clinging to his coat, his hair dampening at the edges, not walking closer, not waving me over, just standing, watching. Elias. My breath caught. For a moment, the whole world narrowed into the space between us. The street, the snow, the glow of the cafe behind me. He looked older than I remembered, or maybe just more human, someone who had carried grief so long it had shaped itself into a quiet companion beside him. I didn't move toward him. Something instinctive told me not to. This was not meant to be a reunion, not the kind where people run into each other's arms or spill out confessions they've been holding in. This was something else, something smaller, something truer. I lifted my chin slightly, a silent acknowledgement that I saw him, that I recognized him, that I remembered every moment of the journey that had led us both here. He responded with the smallest nod, barely more than a breath, but it held the weight of everything we had never needed to say. Gratitude, pride, farewell, and something else. Something like a promise that didn't require words or presence or proximity. A promise that what we had shared mattered, that it had changed us both. He didn't cross the street. He didn't approach me. He didn't step into the cafe. Instead, he closed his umbrella slowly, held it at his side, and looked at the sign in the window. The Anchor Room. First cup free. Kindness required. When he looked back at me, his eyes softened with a warmth that pierced straight through the winter air. Then, without fanfare or hesitation, he turned and began walking down the street, disappearing into the blowing snow as quietly as he had walked into my life months before. I didn't call after him. I didn't chase him. I just watched until his figure blurred into the white, swallowed by the storm. A soft ache pulsed in my chest. Not painful, not longing, just full of everything he had taught me about grief, about kindness, about choosing to live in ways that make the world gentler, full of every choice I had made to build something from nothing, full of the simple, quiet truth that some people don't stay, not because they don't care, but because the chapter they were meant to appear in has ended, and holding on to them would make the story smaller instead of larger. I stepped back inside the cafe, snow melting off my coat onto the polished floorboards I had installed. If you're still here, if you made it all the way to the end of this journey, then maybe this story wasn't just a story for you. Maybe in some quiet corner of your own life you've seen a moment like this. A moment where someone was turned away. A moment where someone needed just one person to look at them with softness instead of suspicion. A moment where kindness felt like the only thing you had to give. And maybe, like me, you learned that sometimes the world doesn't change because of big gestures or grand speeches, but because one person paused long enough to see another human being. That's why stories like this matter. Not because they're dramatic, not because they're emotional, but because they remind us of who we were raised to be, who we still can be, who we're allowed to become at any age. We live in a time where people scroll fast, judge fast, dismiss fast, where misunderstandings happen in 3 seconds and cruelty gets more views than compassion. But you, yes, you stayed to remember something the world forgets every day, that a warm room, a cup of coffee, a small moment of dignity can change a whole life, maybe even 2. So, if this story touched something in you, even a small part, I want to ask you, not as a narrator, not as a channel, but as a fellow human, don't let that feeling stop here. Keep it alive. Carry it with you into tomorrow, into your errands, your routines, your conversations, your quiet moments. Look at someone a little longer. Listen a little deeper. Give a little softer, because kindness is not a language for the perfect. It's a language for the present. And the world needs more people willing to speak it. And if you want to keep walking this road with us, These gentle stories, these quiet reminders, these moments that heal more than they entertain. Then stay. Don't rush away. Don't disappear. Join this little corner of the internet where the world slows down and the heart becomes louder. Like, comment, or subscribe, not because it helps the algorithm, but because it helps us know that stories like this matter to you, that you want more of them, that you want a place where people are seen, even in fiction, even in narrative. Because sometimes stories help us practice the kind of kindness we hope to give in real life. And if you're watching this at the end of a long day, if you're tired or hurting or carrying something heavy nobody else can see, let me tell you something Elias once said, something that stayed with me long after he walked into the snow. Kindness doesn't have to be remembered. It only has to be continued. So let's continue. Together. One story at a time. One moment at a time. One act of courage so small it looks like nothing to the world, but means everything to someone who was about to give up. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing softness in a world that pushes people to be hard, and thank you truly for letting this story sit with you. We'll see you in the next one. Somewhere out there, another soul is waiting to be seen.